Hello and welcome to the McAfee ESM Vormetric demo. In this video, we will take a look at the McAfee ESM environment. We will then set up Vormetric for integration with McAfee ESM. Then we will set up a mock breach attempt and see how it reacts within ESM. And then we'll take a walkthrough around the dashboard that was created for this demo specifically for Vormetric. And finally, we will set up an alarm in McAfee ESM and see how this alarm displays. So when we boot up McAfee ESM, the first thing we see is this screen. It's a combination of a text screen as well as an LCD panel or an emulation LCD panel that would appear on a physical appliance. You can press escape to enter the LCD menu, and then you can navigate using the arrow keys. It explains all that. If you want to go into the command line, you can press Alt F2 and do so. So let's do escape, go to the LCD panel. We'll see a few things there. Some of the configuration information that's been already set up. There's an IT configuration setup, a NIC setup. We can do a few things here. So we can set up the IP config. So why don't we look at the config for MGT1, which is our NIC, network interface card. And we can specify or see what the IP address was set to there. So we can escape from there. It's already set up. Now we're ready to go into the command line here. We're going to use the command line in order to show the stream of data coming in from the Vormetric Data Security Manager appliance into McAfee ESM. So we'll do Alt F2, we'll log in as root, we'll enter the password, and it's a typical Linux interface. So we'll enter the TCP dump command where we specify the address of the appliance that's sending data to, and the port that's sending data to McAfee ESM, and now it's sitting there and listening for any activity coming through. Now let's go to the Vormetric web administrator's interface and set up communication to the McAfee ESM. So we modify the logs menu and go to syslogs. Go to the syslogs menu, and our target system for the McAfee ESM is shown there as the IP address 141. We're using UDP transport protocol, the port number 514, and message format CEF. So this is what it would look like to add a new server to which we can send the syslog. We can select the transport protocol, put in a server name, select a port number, select the message type that we want. The one we're using for McAfee is CEF. Other message types are also supported. So that's set up. Now we're going to try and access some data that's protected, just to raise some messages, event messages that should appear in McAfee ESM. So we've opened two SSH sessions to the same host. We logged in one window as root, and the second window we've logged in as the user TH. That's the user ID of that user, TH, Tony Hadfield. So we're going to try accessing files that should be available to Tony, but not to the root. That is, the root will not have permission to access the file, but TH or Tony will be able to access it. So as Tony, we can see there's a directory that's being protected called vdata1 off the root. There's a file, mynewfile.txt, and we can see information about the file. If we do a cat, we can actually see the contents of the file as it gets typed out to the screen. So there's actually clear text in that file, so we can see that. So now let's try it as root. We're looking at the same directory. We do an ls and we see the name of the file. We can do ls minus l and get details on that file. But if we do a cat command, we get denied. So the permission denied. The root user does not have access. But as a savvy root user, I can try and switch users to try and become Tony because I know he's authorized. So I'm going to try SU, or switch user, to TH, which is Tony Hadfield. And we'll try doing the cat command again as that user, but he's still denied. So Vormetric and the Vormetric agent that's installed on this Linux system is able to determine that the admin has tried to change users to another user and still cannot get access. So it still prevents the root administrator or the root user from accessing a file they shouldn't be able to access. So we can run it a few times and see if we can collect that data inside of McAfee ESM. So now let's go to McAfee ESM. We can click a refresh if we want to get the latest data coming in from the sources. We can see there are already some events showing in this window, the event summary window. But let's look how the Vormetric DSM is set up inside McAfee ESM. So we'll look at the local receiver and expand that. We're going to expand that. It's easy to add a data source, and that's where we added the Vormetric DSM. And there it is. You can actually drill down on one of these entries to see only the data related to that source. But let's look at the properties for that DSM and look at the editor for that. And we can see that there's already a configuration set up for Vormetric DSM. So ESM already knows about Vormetric because you see it in the data source vendor list. As an admin, I did not have to add anything to McAfee ESM to add Vormetric. I mean, it was already there. Data source is there. The data format is CEF. So we're actually pulling data security. It's a data source model. The CEF format is the one that's being used in this case. The data retrieval will be syslog. We've enabled parsing. So the McAfee ESM will be able to do the parsing of the data. It understands how to parse Vormetric data out of the box. We also turned on logging so we can back up our logs as well. We have a name for the Vormetric appliance. We have the IP address and the actual host name. Additional settings are shown there as well. Port number is 514 as we saw in the Vormetric environment. We did not enable TLS because we're only doing this for demonstration purposes right now. We're good. We can cancel out because it's already set up. So this is the initial default screen for McAfee ESM. It's called Default Summary. It does show us messages and events that have occurred in the source, but it doesn't give us enough information about what the details are of these accesses, right? So if we want to get more detail, for example, on the rejected accesses, who was rejected and why they were rejected, we'll need something a little more detailed. So we've created in advance of this demo a dashboard view for Vormetric. It's called dashboard-Vormetric. And this gives us the information as we want to see it. So we'll just expand the screen so we can see things a little better. Do a refresh to get the latest activity. So now we're going to run those commands again and see if I can pull in more activity into the system. So I'll try that cat command multiple times again as root user, and see those events appear again inside of those additional events should appear inside of ESM. So while that occurs, we can look at all the different types of events that have occurred that were trapped by the agent. So the agent, the Vormetric agent, has intercepted all this activity on that Linux server. All that was logged. And from the command line, we can actually see the activity as it happens, as it flows in from the DSM to McAfee ESM. So in this case, we're looking at an entry that shows the name of the policy that was enacted, that it was an error, it was an alarm, and more detail there. in ESM, I can actually select one of the events from there, and those other windows that are dependent on that first summary window will change in order to show you details for the item that was selected. The reason that works is because the other windows are bound to the summary window. So there's kind of a link that detects the changes in the summary window and therefore allows you to drill down. The events table is also bound, but it's bound to source user, not to summary. So if we select a user in the source user window, the events will change. Selecting the second reject access entry, we can see all the users who were rejected by that type of reject. It's a different type of reject access. You'll see that it'll have a different signature, really. So in this case, I could see there are different kinds of root entries. One of them here was a root access as a faked Oracle user. Here, this is a pure root user. There's an administrator user for Windows, and here's one where the root actually tried to log in as Tony Hadfield, TH, so they faked themselves as TH. That's the one we're concerned with right now. We're going to try and set up an alert for that, but let's later on. So let's click on this one and look at the details of the events for that root faked login. So there are 5 events. 5 events occurred twice actually, and if I select one of the events, right, I can see the details of that. This is the packet that was actually sent by the DSM, the Vormetric appliance, to McAfee ESM. So we're looking here at the name of the host where this activity occurred, the date and time, of course. We see there's information right off the bat that says that the entry was a rejected access entry. We also see information about the category of the event. This was an alarm. The policy that was used here that was intercepted, or that intercepted the activity, was a Linux system file protection policy. This was a policy that was created in Vormetric that would get enabled if the data directory that it's protecting is being accessed. So there's the user, the username, the groups they belong to, and we also see that the user had done a switch user to fake themselves as the user Tony Hadfield, TH. And we see the process that the user ran. So that was the cat process. If you remember, at the command line we did cat to type out the contents of a text file onto the screen. The action that was done was a read file action to the operating system. A cat command actually looks like a read file because you're actually reading the file to be able to display it in the command line. The file ID shows us the directory where the file exists. And the file name itself is shown here under file path, myufile.txt, so that file exists under the vdata directory. We can see the message that printed out showing us that it was a faked user, and that's why the user was denied, because there was a faked user. Vormetric detects the fact that a user tried to authenticate as a different user, or a root tried to switch user to a different user. And they can do that typically without entering a password. And because we can detect this kind of activity, we can deny the access. The reason code here shows us where within the policy verification stopped. It didn't match the first rule because it was a different process. Because it didn't match the second rule because it wasn't the right user. It didn't match the third rule because it wasn't the right action. But it did match the fourth rule. That's what the M is for. It means that it was matched. So the effect of that last rule, the decision that was given to that last rule, was to deny. This again shows us the name of the policy that was used to protect. If we click on the Details tab, we have some information that was parsed out by the system itself, by McAfee. So we see the source user information, but it assigns as well a signature ID to the event. So it has a unique signature that is given to it based on the parameters within that activity. There are additional details, geolocation, description, custom types you can create as well. Now we can show how to create an alert based on this specific unique activity. So just right click on, or just select the activity and go into the menu and select Actions, Create New Alarm From, and we can create it from the signature ID. We'll select signature ID from the list. Obviously you can create alarms from a whole set of different items. So we'll give it a name. We'll call it faked route. If we look at the condition, this was already set up for us because it was based on the event we had highlighted. So signature ID, and that was the value that we saw in that Details tab. For frequency, we can set that to 1 minute so that we can test it out and see activity and an alert raised as we do it, as we perform some activities that should be alerted upon. We can focus this on a particular source, which is Vormetric ESM. We're going to log the event. We're going to also ask for a visual alert, and as well play an audio file, get some audio sound as well. We can send messages to an admin, a security personnel as well. We can actually create a case automatically based on that, put it on a watch list. Additional information you can add there as well. So click Next. I could have it automatically escalate if no action has been taken after a while. I'm going to assign it to specific administrators at this point. And we can finish. And now what we can do is run that cat command a few times from the command line and see our alert get activated. So let's clear the screen. Actually, we're going to log out, exit as Tony, and go back to root, and we're going to try that cat command. So we're not going to get any alerts based on this because we're not a fake user at this point. But we should get a raise alert if we change ourselves back to Tony. So we're going to try switch user again, back to Tony, TH. And we're going to run that cat command several times again. Run that a few times. And at this point, we should be getting an alert at any moment, right? That's going to be within that 1 minute cycle that we've set up. Going back to the interface here. We can actually manually pull the events, and we can hear the event, the alert, and we can also see the alert come up on the screen. It shows us that faked route alert that we created. So that alerted us that someone was doing some suspicious activity. We can also look in the navigator on the left that this root faked user event was added to my set of alarms. And I can now select whether to acknowledge it or to create a new case on it, etc. That brings up a window, and that allows me to do some more investigation. And that's how you get fine-grained view of accesses and activity of the sensitive data on your systems using Vormetric and the Vormetric agent. The agents give you detailed information not only about who's accessing what file, but what exactly are they doing to that file, which you don't normally get with other security products. So that concludes the demo. I encourage you to research this a little more and get more detail as to the integration between Vormetric and the McAfee ESM environment. So to summarize what we saw today in this video, we looked at the McAfee ESM environment, We saw how easy it was to set up Vormetric to integrate with McAfee ESM. Then we set up a mock breach attempt in which an administrative user tried to access a file they were not authorized to access. Then they tried to switch user to an authorized user and were still denied access to the file. We did a dashboard walkthrough where we saw a dashboard specific to Vormetric data. And finally, we set up an alarm and saw it happen in action as it detected suspicious activity.